Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're embarking on an epic journey, a deep dive into the annals of European history to explore a dynasty that for centuries shaped the continent's destiny like few others. We're talking, of course, about the Habsburgs. Imagine a single family, their lineage stretching back nearly 1,000 years, their influence spanning from the sun-drenched plains of Spain to the icy peaks of the Alps, from the bustling ports of the Netherlands to the vast plains of Hungary, from the sprawling colonial territories in the Americas to distant outposts in Asia like the Philippines. They were more than mere rulers. They were architects of empire, discerning patrons of the arts and sciences, unwavering devout Catholics, shrewd politicians, and relentless empire builders driven by an insatiable dynastic ambition. Their iconic emblem, the majestic double-headed eagle, soared over an empire so vast that for a significant period of time it was famously said that the sun never set on their dominions, a truly unprecedented global reach for a single ruling house. They were kings and queens, emperors and empresses, archdukes and archduchesses, and their sprawling, complex story is one of unparalleled power, meticulously forged through an intricate web of strategic marriages, punctuated by devastating wars that reshaped borders, profound religious conflicts that tore societies apart, and ultimately a slow, inevitable decline that dramatically reshaped the map of Europe and the course of global history. From their humble beginnings as minor counts in a medieval Swiss castle to commanding a sprawling multi-continental empire that defined an era, the Habsburgs' narrative is a testament to ambition, resilience, adaptability, and the relentless pursuit of dynastic glory, a pursuit that transcended individual reigns and became a generational mission, a shared inheritance of purpose and responsibility. This is a tale woven with vibrant threads of triumph and profound tragedy, a saga that profoundly impacted the political, cultural, social, and religious landscape of Europe for over 600 years, leaving an indelible mark that resonates even today. Their legacy is etched into the very foundations of numerous modern nations, visibly apparent in grand palaces, celebrated artworks that fill the world's most prestigious museums, complex legal systems, enduring architectural styles, and the intricate, often fraught, tapestry of modern European identity itself. Their story is not just a chronicle of powerful rulers, it's a profound window into the evolution of governance, the intricate machinations of diplomacy, the far-reaching impact of religious upheaval, the rise and fall of empires, the dynamic interplay between different cultures, and the enduring, often complex, power of family, offering invaluable insights into the fundamental forces that shaped a continent and continue to echo in its present. Before we fully immerse ourselves in the captivating and complex history of this extraordinary family, a story that is as much about human endeavor as it is about geopolitical power, I'd love to hear from all of you in the comments below. How has your day been treating you so far? Share a little bit about what's happening in your world, whether it's a small victory you're celebrating, a new challenge you're tackling, or simply a quiet day of reflection. And looking ahead, what's one significant goal you're aiming for in the future? It could be anything, big or small, personal or professional, a new skill you want to master, a book you want to finish, a trip you dream of taking, a personal challenge you want to conquer, or a contribution you hope to make to your community. Let me know. Your engagement truly makes this community special, fostering a vibrant intellectual exchange, and I'm genuinely interested in hearing about your experiences and aspirations, connecting us all through our shared human journey. Now let's turn our attention to the architects of one of history's most enduring and significant empires, the Habsburgs. Their story doesn't begin with a grand coronation or a sweeping conquest, but rather with an almost anonymous origin in the unassuming, rugged landscape of medieval Switzerland. The name itself, Habsburg, derives from Habsburg, or Hawk's Castle, a fortress built on a hill called Wilpelsburg in the Aargau region, now part of northern Switzerland, around the year 1020 by Count Radbot of Klettgau, a lesser-known nobleman of the time whose family traced its origins to the Aticanids of Alsace. For several generations they were merely counts, minor nobles among many in the fragmented, decentralized patchwork of the Holy Roman Empire, wielding limited regional influence primarily around their ancestral lands in Alsace and Swabia, along the upper Rhine River and within the confines of the Swabian Duchy. They certainly seemed not destined for the dizzying heights of power they would eventually attain, being just one of many ambitious baronial families vying for local dominance in a politically diverse and competitive landscape where many powerful dynasties like the Hohenstaufens, Wittelsbachs, and Luxemburgs held far greater sway and prestige. Their early history is a fascinating study in incremental gains, shrewd land acquisitions, and a keen eye for opportunity within the complex feudal system of medieval Europe, characterized by decentralized authority and shifting allegiances. They were not particularly wealthy or militarily dominant in their nascent stages, often overshadowed by more established dukes and princes from powerful lineages, lacking a vast treasury or a large standing army. Instead, they relied more on strategic alliances forged through carefully chosen marriages, patient cultivation of relationships with powerful neighbors, and astute management of their relatively modest land holdings, gradually building up their territorial base piece by piece. They expanded their domains not primarily through large-scale warfare, but through careful marriages to local noble families, advantageous purchases of territories and rights, and the patient accumulation of feudal rights, judicial privileges, and administrative roles, gradually consolidating a network of influence within the fragmented Central European political landscape. They bided their time, building a solid, resilient foundation that would eventually support an empire, demonstrating a methodical approach to territorial expansion, often characterized by legal maneuvering, careful administrative organization, and economic accumulation rather than outright military force, truly distinguishing them from many contemporary lords who frequently engaged in costly and risky warfare. This patient accumulation of properties and rights, often through legal means rather than conquest, allowed them to slowly grow their Hausmacht, their inherent dynastic power base, setting the stage for their unparalleled expansion in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. The true turning point, the moment their fortunes began to ascend from regional prominence to imperial significance, signaling a dramatic shift in their destiny, arrived in the pivotal year of 1273. This was when Rudolf IV, Count of Habsburg, later known as Rudolf I of Germany, a relatively obscure figure at the time with a reputation for integrity, military prowess, and a surprising political acumen, was elected King of the Romans. This was not a preordained ascent or the result of overwhelming power. Rather, it was a cunning and calculated move by the prince-electors. Europe had just endured a tumultuous and anarchic period known as the Interregnum, 1254-1273, marked by chaos, lawlessness, the absence of a strong, recognized emperor, and fierce internal power struggles, which had allowed the electoral princes to consolidate their own power and virtually ignore central authority. They desired a weak ruler, someone without a pre-existing strong power base, someone they believed they could easily control and who would not threaten their newly acquired privileges to prevent any single powerful dynasty from dominating the empire and undermining their own cherished autonomy. They profoundly underestimated Rudolf. He was a man of considerable astuteness, determination, and practical ambition, quickly consolidating his power, effectively maneuvering against rivals who scoffed at his humble origins and questioned his legitimacy, and crucially, laying the groundwork for future dynastic expansion. His most decisive and pivotal action was his confrontation with King Ottokar II of Bohemia in 1278. Ottokar, one of the most powerful and ambitious princes in the empire, who had expanded his dominions significantly during the interregnum, acquiring the wealthy duchies of Austria, Styria, Carinthia, and Carniola, refused to acknowledge Rudolf's election and held vast, wealthy territories, effectively challenging the new king's authority and threatening to create a powerful rival state at the heart of the empire. Rudolf's triumph over Ottokar at the Battle of Marchfeld, also known as the Battle of Dürnkruth and Jedenspeigen, was monumental, establishing his authority and securing a new strategic power base. This decisive victory secured the immensely valuable duchies of Austria and Styria for the Habsburgs, transforming their power base from a relatively small Swiss territory and minor Swabian countship to a vast and strategically vital domain at Beer, the very heart of Central Europe, linking the Germanic lands with potential expansion routes to the east. This acquisition was foundational, establishing Vienna as their administrative and cultural center and providing the territorial springboard for all future ambitions. It decisively shifted their focus eastward, embedding them deeply within the Germanic lands and positioning them as a major, enduring player in the Holy Roman Empire, marking their definitive transition from a peripheral noble family to a central, indispensable force within the intricate framework of the Holy Roman Empire, beginning their long and often tumultuous association with the imperial crown, which they would eventually hold almost continuously for centuries, giving them a distinct and powerful voice in European affairs and irrevocably altering the geopolitical landscape of Central Europe for generations to come, setting them on a path of unprecedented influence. The centuries that followed Rudolf's reign from the late 13th to the late 15th century saw the Habsburgs solidify their hold on Austria and gradually extend their influence, but not without significant challenges, setbacks, and periods of internal strife that tested their resolve. They faced numerous rebellions from local nobility and even their own cities, often resisting attempts at centralization of power and taxation, disputes with other powerful noble families like the Wittelsbachs, Luxemburgs, and Jagiellonians, who also vied for influence and the imperial crown, leading to intermittent conflicts and power struggles. They notably lost their original ancestral homelands in the early 14th century to the nascent Swiss Confederacy through a series of defeats like Morgarten, 1315, and Sempach, 1386, forcing them to fully commit their resources and focus to their new power base in Austria, severing their ties to their original feudal roots. This loss, initially a blow to their prestige and a painful setback, paradoxically strengthened their resolve to consolidate their position in their newly acquired eastern territories, focusing their energies on expanding their Hausmacht in the fertile Danube basin. During this period, the family also experienced internal divisions, notably the Leopoldan line, ruling over Styria, Carinthia, Carniola, Tyrol, and further Austria, and the Albertine line, ruling over the Archduchy of Austria proper, which led to intermittent civil wars, family feuds, and a temporary weakening of their collective power, demonstrating that even within the family, the pursuit of power could be fractious and destructive. However, amidst these challenges and internal conflicts, a consistent, defining pattern began to emerge, a characteristic that would become the hallmark of their dynastic success, setting them apart from many of their contemporaries and fundamentally transforming the very nature of empire building, the strategic application of marriage. While other European dynasties primarily relied on brute military conquest to expand their territories, often at immense cost in lives and treasure, leading to constant warfare and instability, the Habsburgs perfected the art of matrimonial diplomacy, turning alliances into inheritances. Their unofficial motto, which became a widely recognized saying across Europe, A testament to their unique and highly successful strategy, belligerent Ali to Felix Austria Nube. Let others wage war, you happy Austria marry, was not just a clever phrase or a romantic ideal. It was a highly effective, deeply pragmatic, and profoundly successful long-term policy that yielded astonishing results, accumulating wealth and territory without spilling blood. Through meticulously arranged unions, often involving intricate negotiations, lavish ceremonies, complex dowry and inheritance arrangements, and decades of careful planning, they acquired vast territories and cemented crucial alliances, frequently avoiding costly and destructive conflicts that would drain their resources and destabilize their power. This was a patient, long-term strategy, relying on careful genealogical planning, precise interpretation of inheritance laws, and the patient accumulation of titles and claims rather than the unpredictable vagaries of battlefield outcomes or the immense expense of perpetual warfare. They meticulously charted bloodlines and potential inheritances across Europe, securing territories and claims that others spent fortunes and countless lives attempting to conquer, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of dynastic politics, legal mechanisms, and long-term asset management. This emphasis on marital connections allowed them to accumulate a sprawling collection of lands and titles without exhausting their resources in constant warfare, laying the groundwork for an unprecedented continental empire that was a mosaic of disparate realms united by a common ruler and a complex, often intricate web of family ties, a unique approach to empire building that contrasted sharply with the more direct military expansion of other, more aggressive powers of the era. This patient accumulation of properties and rights, often through legal means rather than conquest, allowed them to slowly grow their Hausmacht, their inherent dynastic power base, setting the stage for their unparalleled expansion in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. The true breakthrough in this strategy, the moment the Habsburgs truly transcended regional power and stepped onto the global stage, becoming a force that shaped the destiny of continents and irrevocably altered the course of European history, came with Emperor Maximilian I, who reigned from 1493 to 1519. Maximilian was a figure of immense energy, foresight, and a truly captivating personality, often romanticized as the last knight, for his embrace of chivalric ideals and his love for tournaments and feats of arms, while simultaneously being a pragmatic and forward-thinking ruler. He was a quintessential Renaissance prince, a keen patron of the arts, commissioning masterpieces from artists like Albrecht Dürer, a pioneer in printmaking, and developing new printing techniques that aided his political propaganda and the dissemination of his image. He was a skilled knight who championed chivalry and participated eagerly in tournaments, and a shrewd diplomat who understood the evolving landscape of European power, the importance of public image, and the emerging concept of the nation-state. He was also a passionate advocate for military reform, contributing significantly to the development of early modern artillery and infantry tactics, particularly the disciplined Landsknechts, which transformed warfare. His own marriage in 1477 to Mary of Burgundy, the sole heiress to the vast and immensely wealthy Burgundian Low Countries, was a strategic masterstroke that launched the Habsburgs into the ranks of Europe's leading powers. This union, despite a subsequent and protracted war with France, the Burgundian Succession Wars, for control of parts of Burgundy, brought the immensely prosperous lands of modern-day Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Franche-Comté, including crucial trade centers like Antwerp, Bruges, and Ghent, with their sophisticated textile and banking industries and immense urban wealth, into the Habsburg fold. This instantly transformed them from a primarily landlocked Central European power into a major maritime and economic force, with access to immense wealth, sophisticated trade networks, and a highly urbanized, economically advanced population, providing crucial financial resources and strategic leverage against their perennial rival France, which had also coveted Burgundy's riches. This pivotal acquisition was followed by a subsequent, even more impactful arrangement orchestrated by Maximilian, the marriage of his son, Philip the Handsome, to Joanna the Mad, the daughter of the powerful and influential Catholic monarchs of Spain, Ferdinand of Aragon, and Isabella of Castile. This single union, planned with meticulous care and foresight, especially given the various contenders for the Spanish thrones and the complex political intricacies of the Iberian Peninsula, laid the foundation for the most spectacular expansion of Habsburg power. Philip and Joanna's children were poised to inherit not only the traditional Habsburg lands in Central Europe, the rich Burgundian territories, and the powerful Spanish kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, which had recently unified, but also the burgeoning empires of the New World, recently discovered and actively colonized by Spain, bringing unimaginable wealth and resources from across the Atlantic, including vast quantities of silver and gold from the mines of Potosi and Zacatecas, integrating the vast territories of the Americas into their nascent global domain. The sheer scale of this impending inheritance was simply unprecedented in recorded history, setting the stage for a world-spanning empire unlike any seen before. A truly unique phenomenon built on a foundation of dynastic planning rather than a singular military conquest, an empire truly assembled through marriage. The culmination of these brilliant dynastic maneuvers, a dizzying accumulation of crowns and titles, arrived with the birth of Charles V in 1500 in Ghent, Flanders, a city in his Burgundian inheritance. Charles was born into an inheritance that was truly unprecedented in European history, a truly global patrimony that stretched across 3 continents and beyond. By the remarkably young age of 19, through a series of unexpected deaths within his family, the premature passing of his father Philip in 1506, the subsequent mental decline of his mother Joanna, rendering her incapable of ruling effectively, and the deaths of his maternal grandparents, Ferdinand of Aragon in 1516 and Isabella of Castile in 1504, he found himself sovereign over an empire of staggering proportions. He was Duke of Burgundy, inheriting the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Franche-Comté, Archduke of Austria, inheriting the Habsburg hereditary lands, including Austria, Styria, Carinthia, Carniola, and Tyrol, King of Spain, inheriting the United Two, crowns of Castile and Aragon, including Naples, Sicily, Sardinia, and the vast overseas Spanish Empire, recently expanded by the conquests of Mexico and Peru, and crucially, in 1519, he was elected Holy Roman Emperor, overcoming the strong candidacy of Francis I of France and Henry VIII of England, thanks to clever diplomacy and significant financial expenditure provided largely by the powerful Fugger banking family of Augsburg. This vast collection of territories encompassed not just the traditional Habsburg lands in Central Europe and the immense wealth of the Low Countries, but also the entirety of the Spanish Peninsula, the southern Italian states, and the rapidly expanding Spanish colonies in the Americas, including vast swathes of Mexico, Peru, and the Caribbean, stretching from the Andes to the Caribbean, and eventually even parts of Asia, like the Philippines. It was an empire on which, for the first time in human history, it was genuinely true that the sun never set. A territorial behemoth spanning continents and oceans, presenting an unparalleled administrative challenge. The sheer logistical challenge of governing such a sprawling and diverse realm with its myriad languages, German, Spanish, Dutch, Italian, French, Latin, and countless indigenous languages, distinct cultures, fragmented legal systems, and deeply ingrained local traditions, was immense, demanding constant attention and adaptation from its ruler. Charles was truly an itinerant monarch, constantly on the move, shuttling between his various capitals across Europe, from Madrid to Brussels, to Augsburg to Vienna, enduring countless arduous journeys across rough seas and difficult terrain, engaging in complex communication with distant viceroys and governors, and mastering diverse political realities. Charles V was not merely a ruler. He was a global emperor, a tireless administrator, and military commander, facing challenges from every corner of his vast domain, striving to maintain cohesion across an empire that often felt more like a personal union of disparate kingdoms than a truly unified state, a challenge that would ultimately prove insurmountable given the technology and administrative capabilities of the era and the very nature of his diverse inheritance. His personal burden of governing such a diverse and dispersed realm, coupled with constant warfare and religious strife, would eventually lead him to an unprecedented decision. Charles V's reign from 1519 to 1556 represented the absolute zenith of Habsburg power, a period of breathtaking expansion and formidable influence that saw the dynasty at the peak of its authority, presiding over a truly global domain. But it was also a period of relentless challenge and profound transformation that would test the very limits of his remarkable capacity for work, statesmanship, and personal endurance. His reign was largely defined by three major interconnected struggles that would consume his energy, exhaust his treasury, and dictate his policies, often forcing him to prioritize one threat over another: the Protestant Reformation, the persistent expansion of the Ottoman Empire, and the continuous costly rivalry with France. These concurrent pressures meant Charles was constantly on the move, shuttling between his various capitals, engaging in diplomacy and warfare across disparate geographical theaters, from Spain to Germany to the Low Countries, enduring countless arduous journeys across rough seas and difficult terrain, often suffering from gout, a testament to his boundless energy, unwavering sense of duty, and his deep-seated belief in his divine mission to uphold the Catholic Church and imperial authority, a true crusader king striving to maintain a unified Christian Europe in an increasingly fractured world. The Protestant Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther's 95 Theses posted in Wittenberg in 1517, fundamentally fractured the religious unity of Europe, which had for centuries been broadly unified under the Roman Catholic Church, and posed an existential threat to Charles V's authority as the divinely appointed Holy Roman Emperor and staunch defender of Catholicism. Luther's ideas, advocating for salvation through faith alone, the primacy of Scripture over tradition, and challenging papal authority and the sale of indulgences, resonated deeply with many people and spread like wildfire across the German states. This spiritual awakening quickly gained significant political dimensions, as many princes embraced Protestantism, not only for sincere religious conviction, but also to gain autonomy from Rome and the emperor, seize lucrative church lands, and strengthen their own regional power, creating a decentralized religious and political landscape within the empire that actively resisted imperial control. Charles, a deeply devout Catholic and a product of the Counter-Reformation spirit, saw it as his sacred duty to defend the established church and restore religious conformity throughout his lands, believing that religious unity was absolutely essential for political stability and imperial cohesion. He convened the Diet of Worms in 1521, where Luther famously refused to recant his writings, declaring, "Here I stand, I can do no other." This event marked a definitive, irreconcilable split within Western Christendom, making reconciliation increasingly difficult. The ensuing religious wars, particularly within the Holy Roman Empire, notably the Schmalkaldic War, 1546-1547, against the League of Protestant Princes, drained Charles's treasury and diverted his attention and military resources from other pressing matters, forcing him to negotiate with rebellious princes and confront armed leagues of Protestant states, even as foreign threats loomed large on his borders. Despite military victories, notably at the Battle of Mühlberg in 1547, where he decisively defeated the Protestant Schmalkaldic League, temporarily reasserting imperial authority, Charles was ultimately unable to stamp out Protestantism entirely. The religious division had become too deeply entrenched, having gained significant political, social, and cultural traction among vast segments of the population and their ruling elites. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 ultimately granted rulers within the empire the right to choose the religion of their territory under the principle of cuius regio, ius religio, whose realm his religion, a major concession that significantly undermined imperial authority, permanently fractured the unity of the empire, and permanently altered the religious landscape of Germany, creating a complex patchwork of Catholic and Protestant states. This outcome was a profound personal and political disappointment for Charles, who had dreamt of a unified Catholic Europe under his imperial leadership, a grand vision that would never be realized, leaving him with a deep sense of unfulfilled ambition and contributing to his decision to abdicate. Simultaneously, Charles faced the formidable, relentless threat of the Ottoman Empire, led by the brilliant and expansionist Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, often referred to as the lawgiver by his own people due to his comprehensive legal reforms, or the Grand Turk by Europeans due to his immense power and the vastness of his empire. The Ottomans, having conquered Constantinople in 1453 and now controlling vast swathes of the Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans, were pushing relentlessly into Central Europe, expanding their dominion into the newly acquired kingdom of Hungary after their decisive victory at Mohat in 1526, which claimed the life of his brother-in-law, King Louis II of Hungary and Bohemia, leaving Ferdinand I as his heir by marriage. Vienna, the traditional Habsburg capital and crucial gateway to Western Europe, was besieged by a massive Ottoman army in 1529, a moment of extreme peril for the dynasty and for Christian Europe itself. The city, though valiantly defended by its small garrison and civilian population, was on the brink of collapse, facing starvation and relentless bombardment. However, Charles, alongside his brother Ferdinand, marshaled forces to defend the city, successfully repelling the siege through courageous defense, a fortuitous early winter that hampered Ottoman logistics and strategic maneuvering, but acknowledging the immense and persistent threat on their eastern flank, which forced them to maintain a constant vigil, build extensive fortifications along their borders, and occasionally pay tribute. The Ottoman expansion also threatened Habsburg naval dominance in the Mediterranean, leading to numerous skirmishes and raids along the coasts of Italy and Spain, as Ottoman privateers and Barbary corsairs, like the infamous Barbarossa, harassed shipping, disrupted vital trade routes, and captured Christian slaves, necessitating costly naval campaigns, the maintenance of large galley fleets, and the construction of coastal fortifications and watchtowers across his Italian and Spanish territories. The constant need to defend against Ottoman incursions, both on land and sea, stretched Habsburg resources thin, requiring the maintenance of large standing armies and extensive fortifications along a vast and vulnerable frontier, diverting vital funds and manpower from other pressing issues across his disparate realms. This eastern front became a perpetual drain on Habsburg coffers and military strength, a constant battle for survival against a powerful, technologically advanced, and well-organized adversary that demonstrated a high degree of strategic acumen and military innovation. And then there was France. For centuries, the Valois kings of France, especially Francis I, viewed the encirclement by Habsburg territories, Spain to the south, the Low Countries to the north, and the Holy Roman Empire to the east, as an intolerable threat to their own security, prestige, and geopolitical ambitions, a literal vice around their kingdom that stifled their expansion and threatened their independence. This geographical predicament fueled a deep-seated antagonism and a series of conflicts that would dominate Charles's reign, often forcing him to make difficult choices between fighting on different fronts. The rivalry between Charles V and Francis III was intensely personal, fueled by mutual distrust, competing claims to lucrative territories, like the Duchy of Milan, a gateway to Italy, and a strategic link between Habsburg Spain and Austria, and the Kingdom of Naples, and a fierce desire for European hegemony, and played out in a series of brutal and costly wars across Italy, the Low Countries, and along the French border, with each ruler viewing the other as a direct obstacle to their respective claims to European supremacy. These conflicts, known collectively as the Italian Wars, driven by dynastic ambition and geopolitical competition, drained both monarchies of vast sums of money and countless lives, preventing any long-term peace and fostering a climate of perpetual suspicion and proxy wars. Italy, in particular, became a crucial battleground for Habsburg and French supremacy, with control over wealthy regions like Milan and Naples, often changing hands amidst complex alliances, betrayals, and devastating campaigns that ravaged the peninsula. Charles's decisive victory at Pavia in 1525, where Francis III was captured and forced to sign the humiliating Treaty of Madrid, momentarily asserted Habsburg dominance, but the rivalry persisted throughout his reign, leading to further conflicts, such as the sack of Rome, 1527, by Charles's mutinous troops, the Battle of Ceresole, 1544, and continuing skirmishes. The constant conflicts prevented Charles from fully concentrating on the Protestant challenge within the empire, or the looming Ottoman threat on his eastern flank, forcing him to fight on multiple, disparate fronts simultaneously, a truly Herculean task for any ruler, even one as energetic and dedicated as Charles, ultimately demonstrating the limits of even immense power when spread too thin across a vast, heterogeneous empire. The strain of managing these three simultaneous, interconnected conflicts, compounded by the vastness and diversity of his inherited lands, finally proved too much for even Charles IV. The sheer scale of governing such a vast, geographically dispersed, and conflict-ridden empire eventually proved overwhelming. Exhausted by constant warfare across multiple fronts, the profound religious strife that divided his subjects and undermined his imperial authority, the immense distances he had to travel to manage his disparate domains, and the overwhelming weight of his immense responsibilities, Charles V, only in his mid-50s, made the astonishing and almost unprecedented decision to abdicate his various crowns in 1556, a decision few monarchs of his stature had ever made. This was an unprecedented act for such a powerful monarch, reflecting his profound weariness, his disillusionment with the intractable problems he faced, his failing health exacerbated by severe gout, and perhaps his ultimate failure to achieve the unified Christian empire he had envisioned. He meticulously divided his vast inheritance, a pragmatic decision to create more manageable entities for his successors, splitting the Habsburg dominions into two distinct branches, the Spanish Habsburgs and the Austrian Habsburgs. His son, Philip II, inherited Spain, the Netherlands, the Italian possessions, Naples, Sicily, Milan, Sardinia, and the entire colonial empire in the Americas, including the recently conquered empires of Mexico and Peru, which continued to expand under Spanish dominion and provided immense wealth. His brother Ferdinand I, who had already been managing the Austrian lands as Charles's representative and had been elected King of the Romans, officially inherited Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, or rather, the part not controlled by the Ottomans, and was confirmed as Holy Roman Emperor, ensuring the continuity of the imperial title within the family. This division, born of necessity, and Charles's pragmatic recognition of the impossibility of governing such a monolithic, sprawling entity from a single center with the administrative tools of the era, marked the formal end of the unified global Habsburg Empire, but also laid the groundwork for two separate powerful dynastic trajectories that would continue to shape European history for centuries to come, each with its own unique challenges, opportunities, and ultimately distinct fates. Charles V retired to the monastery of Yuste in Spain, where he lived out his remaining years in quiet contemplation and spiritual reflection, dedicating himself to clockmaking, his religious devotions, and managing his vast collection of art. A poignant end to a life of unparalleled power, unyielding struggle, and a profound, lasting impact on the political and religious map of Europe, a testament to his extraordinary yet ultimately human limits. Let's now turn our focus to the Spanish branch of the Habsburgs, particularly during the lengthy and impactful reign of Philip II, which began immediately after his father's abdication in 1556 and lasted until 1598. If Charles V was the wandering emperor, constantly traversing his dominions to manage his disparate realms, Philip II was the quintessential sedentary king, a bureaucrat monarch ruling his vast empire from the austere, imposing confines of the Escorial, a sprawling palace monastery mausoleum. Complex, he personally oversaw the construction of, located just outside Madrid, in the foothills of the Sierra de Guadarrama. This monumental structure, a symbol of both devotion, bureaucratic efficiency, and centralized power, became the administrative heart of his empire, reflecting his reign's focus on religious orthodoxy, meticulous governance, and absolute control. Philip was a deeply religious man, famously meticulous and hard-working, renowned for his diligence. He was known as the Paper King for his relentless work ethic, spending countless hours at his desk, poring over countless documents, dispatches, and petitions from across his vast empire, often working late into the night, making decisions with painstaking detail and a heavy reliance on a vast, intricate bureaucracy that stretched from Madrid to Manila in the Philippines. His reign represented the height of Spain's power and influence, an era often referred to as the Spanish Golden Age, Siglo de Oro, a period of immense cultural flourishing in literature and art, producing masterpieces by figures like El Greco, and the literary genius of Miguel de Cervantes, who published Don Quixote after Philip's reign, but was shaped by this era, alongside continued military might and global reach, as the Spanish colonial empire continued to expand in the Americas and established itself firmly in the Philippines. However, Philip's reign, much like his father's, was characterized by relentless conflict, driven by his unwavering commitment to Catholicism and his determination to maintain Spain's imperial dominance and prevent the spread of Protestantism. Across Europe, which he viewed as heresy and a direct threat to divine order and political stability, his principal struggles, which stretched his empire's resources to their absolute limit, included the ongoing fight against the Ottoman Empire in the Mediterranean, the debilitating and protracted revolt of the Netherlands, and the perennial, escalating rivalry with Protestant England. These intertwined conflicts impacted Spain's long-term economic stability and ultimately contributed to its gradual decline despite the immense influx of New World wealth. In the Mediterranean, Philip inherited the task of defending Christendom against the persistent threat of Ottoman expansion and widespread piracy from the Barbary corsairs, who operated from North African bases and raided Christian shipping and coastal towns across the Mediterranean, capturing thousands into slavery. His most significant victory came at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, a monumental naval engagement in the Gulf of Patras, Greece. There, a combined fleet of Spanish, Venetian, Genoese, Papal, and other Catholic forces, sailing under the banner of the Holy League and commanded by Philip's charismatic half-brother, Don John of Austria, decisively defeated the powerful Ottoman navy, inflicting a catastrophic defeat. This was one of the largest naval battles in history, involving hundreds of galleys and tens of thousands of combatants, a truly epic clash that marked a turning point. This monumental victory temporarily checked Ottoman naval power in the Mediterranean, providing a major boost to Christian morale and demonstrating the combined might of Catholic Europe, though the land threat from the Ottomans persisted in Eastern Europe. Philip also oversaw the brutal suppression of a major Morisco converted Muslim revolt in Granada in 1568, a deeply traumatic event for Spain, further solidifying religious uniformity within Spain, and successfully united the crowns of Spain and Portugal in 1580, forming the Iberian Union, adding Portugal's vast colonial empire, including Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, Goa, Macau, and other trading posts, to his already immense dominions, briefly achieving a truly global reach that extended from South America to Goa and Macau. Closer to home, the revolt of the Netherlands became a debilitating and protracted drain on Spain's resources and manpower, a festering wound that would bleed the empire dry for decades, ultimately leading to a significant loss of territory and influence. The Pax Low Countries, inherited from Burgundy, were economically vibrant, highly urbanized, and culturally and religiously diverse, with a significant and growing Calvinist population. Philip's attempts to centralize power, impose heavy taxes, like the infamous 10th penny sales tax, which was deeply unpopular, and enforce strict religious conformity through the Spanish Inquisition, sparked a fierce rebellion among the largely Protestant Dutch, who fiercely valued their traditional liberties, municipal rights, and resented foreign rule and the presence of Spanish troops, viewing them as an occupying force. The 80 Years' War, as it came to be known, was an incredibly brutal and expensive conflict, involving countless sieges, e.g., Haarlem, Leiden, Antwerp, massacres, like the sack of Antwerp, and constant attrition, with Spanish armies often facing fierce resistance, and guerrilla tactics from the determined Dutch rebels led by figures like William of Orange. Despite Spanish military superiority and the efforts of brilliant generals like the Duke of Alba and Alexander Farnese, the Dutch, aided by England and their indomitable spirit, proved remarkably resilient, utilizing their mastery of water defenses, strong urban fortifications, and later, their growing naval power. The war would ultimately lead to the de facto independence of the Dutch Republic in the northern provinces, formally recognized in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia, but not until decades after Philip's death, leaving a lasting scar on Spain's treasury, reputation, and military capacity, a continuous, devastating drain on its national wealth and manpower that severely limited its ability to act decisively elsewhere. Philip's rivalry with England, particularly under Queen Elizabeth I, escalated from religious differences, English privateering against Spanish treasure fleets returning from the Americas, led by audacious figures like Francis Drake, and Elizabeth's open support for the Dutch rebels into open warfare. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic claimant to the English throne, by Elizabeth in 1587, served as a final provocation, legitimizing Philip's long-held ambition to intervene directly in England and restore Catholicism, which he viewed as a divine mission to bring England back to the true faith. Philip assembled the Invincible Armada in 1588, a massive fleet of over 130 ships and nearly 30,000 men intended to invade England, depose Elizabeth, and restore Catholicism by landing a large invasion force. However, the Armada was famously defeated by a combination of more agile English naval tactics, superior seamanship, the effective use of fire ships, and devastating storms in the English Channel and Atlantic, which scattered and destroyed many vessels as they attempted to round Scotland and Ireland. This catastrophic defeat was a major blow to Spanish prestige, a significant military setback, and marked a symbolic turning point in naval power, demonstrating the vulnerability of large, slow fleets, though Spain's overall power remained formidable for some time, and its global empire continued to flourish in the Americas. Philip also orchestrated the annexation of Portugal in 1580, forming the Iberian Union and briefly giving him control over Portugal's vast overseas empire, though this union too would eventually unravel due to Portuguese resistance in the 17th century. Despite these immense challenges and military expenditures, the Spanish Habsburgs continued to expand and exploit their vast colonial empire, bringing vast quantities of silver and gold from the legendary mines of Potosi in modern-day Bolivia and Zacatecas in Mexico into Spain. This influx of wealth, while immense in raw volume, paradoxically contributed to significant inflation within Spain, known as the Price Revolution, as the influx of bullion led to rapidly rising prices for goods and services, diminishing its real value and hurting domestic industries that could not compete with cheaper foreign goods or the lure of easy colonial wealth, causing a decline in local manufacturing. Furthermore, this wealth was largely spent on Philip's endless wars, maintaining his vast bureaucracy and army, and supporting the Catholic Church, rather than on developing Spain's internal industries, productive economy, or infrastructure. The constant demand for funds meant a heavy reliance on foreign bankers, like the Genoese and German Fuggers, and repeated bankruptcies of the Spanish crown, a cycle of debt and dependence that weakened Spain's long-term economic foundations. Despite its apparent riches, laying the groundwork for a slow but steady decline into the 17th century, where it would become increasingly reliant on the wealth from its colonies while its domestic economy stagnated. The reigns of Philip II's successors, Philip III, 1598-1621, Philip IV, 1621-1665, and finally Charles II, 1665-1700, saw a gradual but undeniable decline in Spanish power and influence, marking the slow sunset of the empire's golden age, despite periods of artistic brilliance that continued to thrive. Philip III, a less energetic and more pious ruler than his father, often described as weak-willed and disinterested in governing, largely delegated his authority to favored ministers, particularly the Duke of Lerma, leading to corruption, inefficiency, and a period of relative peace, the 12 years' truce with the Dutch, though Spain remained deeply involved in European conflicts, notably the early stages of the 30 Years' War, which further strained its already depleted resources and compounded its financial woes. His reign saw the controversial expulsion of the Moriscos, descendants of converted Muslims, from Spain in 1609, an act driven by religious zeal and suspicion that had severe negative economic consequences, particularly for agricultural regions, like Valencia, by removing a significant portion of the skilled labor force and agricultural expertise, leading to depopulation and economic decline in certain areas. Philip IV, a more cultured and intelligent king with a genuine interest in the arts and sciences, collecting masterpieces and patronizing artists, faced the monumental task of preserving Spain's empire amidst internal rebellions and relentless external pressures from a resurgent, expansionist France under Louis XIV. His reign saw the height of Spanish Baroque art and literature, producing masterpieces by figures like Diego Velázquez, e.g., Las Meninas, Francisco de Zurbarán, and Bartolomé Esteban Murillo in painting, and the literary brilliance of Miguel de Cervantes, Lope de Vega, and Pedro Calderón de la Barca, reaching their peak, creating timeless works of literature and drama. However, politically and militarily, it was a period of sustained decline. Spain suffered significant defeats in the latter stages of the 30 Years' War, which concluded with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, where Spanish recognition of Dutch independence was formalized, and the subsequent war with France, culminating in the Treaty of the Pyrenees in 1659. This treaty, which ceded significant territory to France, including Roussillon, parts of Flanders, and Artois, and involved the marriage of Philip's daughter, Maria Theresa, to Louis XIV, marked a symbolic and real shift in the European balance of power, solidifying France's rise as the dominant continental power and signaling Spain's diminishing stature. The ongoing war with the Dutch, which concluded with their formal independence in 1648, and devastating revolts in Portugal, leading to its independence in 1640 after 60 years of union, and Catalonia, which sought French aid and independence, further weakened the kingdom, draining its financial reserves and military strength, eroding its vast imperial structure from within and without, demonstrating that even immense colonial wealth could not indefinitely sustain a perpetually overstretched and mismanaged empire. In the face of rising European rivals, the most tragic figure of the Spanish Habsburg line was Charles II, known as El Hechizado, or the Bewitched. Born from generations of incredibly close-knit dynastic marriages, specifically the marriage of his father, Philip IV, to his niece Mariana of Austria, a first-cousin marriage, and his own mother Mariana of Austria to her uncle Philip IV, Charles, suffered from severe physical deformities and profound mental disabilities. A stark and heartbreaking illustration of the devastating consequences of relentless inbreeding, a practice common among European royalty but taken to extremes by the Spanish Habsburgs to preserve family assets and pure bloodlines, leading to a severe genetic bottleneck and numerous inherited conditions, including the famous Habsburg jaw, macroglossia, and various organ dysfunctions. He was sickly from birth, suffering from a range of ailments including hydrocephalus, epilepsy, a large tongue that made speech difficult, and general physical weakness, barely able to speak or walk until much later in life, and largely incapable of governing effectively. He was often described by contemporaries as weak, bewildered, and easily manipulated, a sad shadow of his powerful ancestors. His reign was dominated by intense court intrigues, factions vying for power, and foreign powers, particularly France, led by Louis XIV, who coveted the Spanish inheritance, maneuvering for influence as the question of his inevitable childless succession loomed large and agonizingly over European diplomacy, knowing that his death would ignite a continent-wide conflict for the Spanish throne. The Spanish Habsburg line had effectively run out of direct heirs, a direct and devastating result of their narrow marriage pool designed to keep wealth and power within the family, leading to a profound genetic bottleneck and eventually extinction. His death in 1700 without a direct heir triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal pan-European conflict that would reshape the map of Europe and ultimately place a Bourbon prince, Philip V, grandson of Louis XIV of France, on the Spanish throne, formally ending the direct rule of the Spanish Habsburgs after nearly 2 centuries. The magnificent global empire built by Charles V and Philip II had slowly, painfully, withered away, leaving behind a legacy of grand ambition, artistic brilliance, and the ultimate, devastating price of dynastic isolation and genetic fragility, a poignant and somber end to a once dominant line that could no longer reproduce itself effectively, concluding a chapter of unparalleled power and influence. While the Spanish branch of the Habsburgs was experiencing its golden age and subsequent protracted decline, the Austrian branch, descended from Ferdinand I, was forging its own distinct destiny in Central Europe, moving toward a more centralized and consolidated state. Their story is one of enduring resilience, strategic consolidation, and the gradual transformation from a loose collection of territories within the Holy Roman Empire into a distinct Austrian state, centered increasingly on their hereditary lands, and building a new, more cohesive identity that would last for centuries. Ferdinand I, Charles Darcer's younger brother, inherited the Austrian lands, the Archduchy of Austria, duchies of Styria, Carinthia, Carniola, and the county of Tyrol, Bohemia, and Hungary, though much of Hungary was still under Ottoman occupation. After the decisive victory at Mohács in 1526, which claimed the life of his brother-in-law, King Louis II of Hungary and Bohemia, leaving Ferdinand the Brr as his heir by marriage to Anna Jagiellon, Ferdinand had to fight relentlessly to secure even a portion of Hungary from Ottoman incursions and Hungarian noble factions, often paying tribute to the Ottomans for the parts he did control. He was a capable, pragmatic, and energetic ruler, keenly aware of the threats surrounding his domains and determined to strengthen his new inheritance. He focused on centralizing administration in his diverse territories, creating more efficient institutions like the Aulic Council, Reichshofrat, and the Imperial War Council, Hofkriegsrat, and defending his eastern borders against the relentless Ottomans. He also skillfully navigated the complexities of the Protestant Reformation within the Holy Roman Empire, seeking compromise where possible, e.g., through the Peace of Augsburg, while staunchly defending Catholic interests, laying the groundwork for the counter-reformation in his own lands and fostering the growth of the Jesuit order as a key educational and religious tool. He laid the groundwork for the future strength and cohesion of the Austrian monarchy by creating a more efficient bureaucracy, a standing army, and emphasizing a shift towards a more consolidated state rather than a loose collection of feudal territories, a pivotal shift in Habsburg strategy that would define the trajectory of the Austrian branch, moving away from the dispersed model of Charles V and towards a more unified Austrian identity. The early 17th century saw the Austrian Habsburgs embroiled in a catastrophic conflict that would devastate Central Europe for an entire generation and irrevocably change its political and religious landscape. The 30 Years' War, 1618 and 1648. This was largely a religious war, initially sparked by a rebellion in Bohemia against Habsburg Catholic rule, driven by Protestant grievances against Emperor Ferdinand II's zealous attempts to impose religious uniformity across his domains, and revoke Protestant liberties, specifically the Letter of Majesty, which guaranteed religious freedom in Bohemia. The infamous defenestration of Prague in May 1618, where 2 Habsburg officials were thrown from a castle window by Bohemian Protestant nobles, ignited the conflict. It quickly escalated from a local Bohemian revolt into a wider European struggle involving most major powers, including Protestant Sweden, led by Gustavus Adolphus, the Lion of the North, Catholic France, despite its Catholic faith, driven by anti-Habsburg foreign policy concerns to prevent Habsburg hegemony, and Spain, each with their own geopolitical agendas and dynastic rivalries, turning Germany into a battleground for European supremacy. Emperor Ferdinand II, a staunch Catholic and ardent counter-reformer, sought to reassert imperial authority and religious uniformity throughout the Holy Roman Empire, aiming for a unified Catholic Germany under Habsburg dominance, a grand vision that ultimately failed. The war was characterized by extreme brutality, widespread destruction, famine, disease, including devastating plagues like typhus, and the pervasive use of mercenary armies that ravaged the countryside indiscriminately, leading to widespread atrocities and depopulation. It decimated the population of Germany, with some regions losing up to half or even 2/3 of their inhabitants, leaving vast swathes of land barren and countless cities in ruins, transforming the social, economic, and demographic fabric of Central Europe for generations. The Habsburgs, despite initial successes like the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, which crushed the Bohemian revolt and led to the brutal re-Catholicization and Germanization of Bohemia, and the confiscation of vast noble lands and the military prowess of figures like Albrecht von Wallenstein and Count Tilly, eventually faced the formidable military might of Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, and then the diplomatic and military genius of Cardinal Richelieu of France, who strategically intervened, supporting Protestant powers and financially aiding Sweden, to undermine his traditional Habsburg rivals and prevent a dominant Habsburg Europe. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 finally brought an end to the war, but at a tremendous cost to the Holy Roman Empire and Germany. It significantly weakened the Holy Roman Emperor's power, enhancing the autonomy of the German princes and granting legal recognition to Calvinism alongside Catholicism and Lutheranism, forever splintering the religious unity of Germany. This effectively ended any serious Habsburg ambition to unify Germany under their direct, centralized rule, cementing the fragmented nature of the empire for centuries to come. While the Habsburgs retained their dynastic lands of Austria, Bohemia, and parts of Hungary, the war forced them to reorient their strategy. Instead of focusing on imperial unification across the myriad German states, they would now concentrate on building a strong, centralized, and hereditary state out of their diverse patrimonial lands, particularly Austria, Bohemia, and the expanding territories in Hungary. This marked a crucial shift from aspiring to universal empire to consolidating a powerful, distinct Austrian monarchy, laying the groundwork for a future, more clearly defined Austrian empire that would largely focus on its own dynastic lands and the complexities of its multi-ethnic composition, rather than the elusive dream of a unified German realm. This pivot proved essential for their long-term survival and renewed strength. The late 17th century witnessed a remarkable resurgence of Habsburg power, largely due to their successful campaigns against the Ottoman Empire, which had long been a persistent and terrifying threat on their eastern flank, often engaging in raids deep into Christian lands and demanding tribute payments for parts of Hungary. Under Emperor Leopold I, reigned 1658-1705, the Ottoman threat, which had loomed over Central Europe for centuries and demanded tribute payments for parts of Hungary, finally began to recede, turning the tide after a long period of defensive struggles and stalemate. The pivotal moment arrived in 1683, when the Ottomans, under Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, mounted a massive siege of Vienna, their last major attempt to capture the Habsburg capital and open the way to Western Europe, a climactic moment in the centuries-long struggle between Christianity and Islam. The city, though valiantly defended by its small garrison and civilian population, was on the brink of collapse, facing starvation and relentless bombardment. However, a remarkable relief force, largely composed of Polish and imperial troops, led by the charismatic Polish king Jan III Sobieski and Duke Charles IV of Lorraine, arrived just in time, launching a decisive attack from the Kahlenberg Heights, routing the Ottoman army and lifting the siege, turning the tide of the Ottoman wars in Europe and becoming a symbol of Christian victory and cooperation. This monumental victory was a turning point, marking the beginning of a long series of successful campaigns that pushed the Ottomans out of Hungary and to Transylvania. The military genius of Prince Eugene of Savoy, a brilliant and innovative general in Habsburg's service, played a crucial role in these victories, designing innovative strategies and leading his forces to triumph after triumph, including the decisive Battle of Zenta in 1697, a crushing defeat for the Ottomans, and the subsequent Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, which formally ceded large parts of Hungary, Croatia, Transylvania, and Slavonia to the Habsburgs. These massive territorial gains significantly expanded the Austrian Habsburg dominions, consolidating their power in southeastern Europe and transforming them into a true multi-ethnic empire with diverse Slavic, Magyar, and German populations, creating the territorial basis for the future Austro-Hungarian Empire and shifting their strategic focus decisively eastward and southward. The 18th century presented the Austrian Habsburgs with a new kind of challenge, one rooted in their own dynastic practices and the absence of a direct male heir, the question of succession. Emperor Charles VI, reigned 1711 to 1740, dedicated much of his reign to securing the Pragmatic Sanction, a legal document that aimed to ensure the indivisibility of the Habsburg lands and to allow for female succession, as he had no male heirs, a situation that had caused debilitating succession crises in other European dynasties, like the War of the Spanish Succession, which he himself had fought in. He tirelessly sought the recognition and guarantee of other European powers for this arrangement, making various diplomatic agreements and territorial concessions across Europe, sacrificing the Austrian Netherlands' commercial opportunities via the Ostend Company and ceding territories in Italy to gain their assent, mortgaging future Habsburg interests, and even giving up valuable territories for the sake of securing his daughter's right to rule unmolested and preserving the territorial integrity of his vast inheritance. Despite these extensive diplomatic efforts upon his death in 1740, his 23-year-old daughter, Maria Theresa, faced an immediate and formidable challenge to her inheritance, plunging Europe into the widespread War of the Austrian Succession, E. 1740-1748. Frederick the Great of Prussia, seizing the opportunity presented by a female succession and the perceived weakness of the Habsburg monarchy, immediately invaded the rich Habsburg province of Silesia, violating the Pragmatic Sanction. He had ostensibly guaranteed, simultaneously, other major powers, including France, Bavaria, and Spain, also sought to carve up the Habsburg inheritance, invalidating their prior agreements and seeing an opportunity to expand their own influence at Austria's expense. Maria Theresa, a young, determined, and remarkably capable ruler, proved to be an inspiring figure, demonstrating immense political acumen, a sharp mind, and an unyielding will, despite ultimately losing Silesia to Prussia in the long run, a significant economic and strategic blow that would fuel future rivalries and a subsequent war, the 7 Years' War. She fought tenaciously, rallied her diverse subjects by appealing to their loyalty and her personal plight, famously appearing before the Hungarian Diet with her infant son Joseph, appealing to their traditional loyalty, forged new alliances, notably with France, initiating the diplomatic revolution that reversed traditional alliances between the Habsburgs and Bourbon, reformed her military with impressive speed and efficiency, and ultimately secured her right to the throne, as well as the integrity of the core Habsburg territories, demonstrating a strength and resolve that defied her initial underdog status. Her personal courage and political skill were crucial to her survival and the preservation of her dynasty, transforming her into one of Europe's most respected and powerful monarchs. Maria Theresa's reign from 1740 to 1780 was a period of profound and wide-ranging reform, truly transforming the Austrian monarchy into a modern centralized state, demonstrating an extraordinary capacity for innovative governance and a pragmatic understanding of the state's needs in an increasingly competitive Europe. She recognized that the Habsburgs needed to strengthen their internal administration, streamline their finances, and modernize their military to compete effectively with rising powers like Prussia. She implemented sweeping reforms in the military, improving training, organization, and logistics, establishing new academies like the Theresian Military Academy for Officers and the Military Engineering Academy, and laying the groundwork for a more professional and effective army that would be able to stand its ground against its rivals. In education, she established numerous primary schools, trivial schools, across her domains, reformed existing universities, like the University of Vienna, turning it into a state institution, and promoting scientific study, and created new specialized institutions like the University of Innsbruck and the Oriental Academy for Diplomatic Training, promoting public education and recognizing its importance for a well-functioning state and a skilled bureaucracy. She also reformed the judicial system, reducing the influence of local nobility and introducing a more uniform legal code, and established a Supreme Court. She introduced measures to improve the economy, fostered trade and agriculture, e.g., silk production, potato cultivation, and centralized the administration, creating a more efficient and unified bureaucracy answerable directly to the crown, thus eroding some of the traditional power of the provincial estates and nobles. Her reforms, often advised by brilliant ministers like Chancellor Wenzel Anton von Kaunitz-Reitberg, foreign policy, and Count Friedrich Wilhelm von Haugwitz, domestic and military affairs, were driven by a pragmatic desire to increase state power, revenue, and military effectiveness, often termed Theresian mercantilism, but they also laid the foundations for the future Austrian Empire, proving her not just a survivor, but a true architect of a rejuvenated and more cohesive state. She was a deeply respected figure, a strong and beloved ruler who navigated an era of complex geopolitics with remarkable skill and an unyielding commitment to her family and her diverse peoples, leaving an indelible mark on Austrian history, and becoming one of Europe's most iconic and impactful female rulers, embodying the principles of enlightened absolutism while retaining a strong sense of traditional legitimacy and Catholic piety. Her political acumen was such that she even managed to survive the partial partition of Poland, gaining Galicia, a significant territorial gain. Maria Theresa was succeeded by her son, Joseph II, reigned 1780-1790, a fervent believer in Enlightenment ideals and a truly radical reformer, driven by a boundless energy and an almost obsessive desire for improvement and rationalization, often termed the revolutionary emperor. Joseph was eager to modernize his empire even faster and more thoroughly than his mother, famously declaring himself a philosophical monarch who sought to serve the state through reason, efficiency, and the well-being of his subjects, rejecting traditional religious and noble privileges, often with little regard for tradition or local sensibilities. He embarked on a series of ambitious, often controversial, and frequently ill-conceived reforms aimed at centralizing power, modernizing society, and promoting religious toleration and individual liberty. He abolished serfdom and feudal obligations for peasants, though landowners resisted, and some reforms were later rolled back by his successors, granting them personal freedom and rights. He introduced legal reforms aimed at equality before the law and fairer justice, famously abolishing torture and the death penalty, though it was later reinstated. He curtailed the vast power of the Catholic Church through a policy known as Josephinism by dissolving numerous unproductive monasteries, those not involved in education or charity, and seizing their wealth for secular purposes like education and social welfare, and placing the clergy under direct state control, severing ties with Rome where possible. He granted unprecedented religious freedom to Protestants and Jews through the Patent of Toleration in 1781, a remarkably progressive move for the time, and established civil marriage, further reducing the Church's influence. He tried to standardize administration, education, and even language across the empire, often imposing German as the official language in his zealous drive for uniformity and efficiency, attempting to forge a single, unified imperial identity. While many of his reforms were forward-thinking and well-intentioned, his rapid, often autocratic and uncompromising implementation, without sufficient consultation or regard for local traditions, customs, and sensitivities of his diverse population, alienated many segments of society, leading to widespread resistance from the nobility, the church, and various ethnic groups, especially in Hungary and the Austrian Netherlands, who resented the imposition of centralized control and Germanization. His reforms, though ultimately influential and laying the groundwork for future changes, faced significant opposition, and many were reversed or modified by his successors due to the widespread unrest and resentment they caused, demonstrating the limits of enlightened absolutism and the perils of implementing radical change from above in a complex, multi-ethnic, traditional society that valued custom and local autonomy over abstract rationalism. His brief but impactful reign, cut short by illness and the immense strain of his frantic, often unpopular reform efforts, was followed by his brother, Leopold II, reigned 1790–1792, who cautiously rolled back some of Joseph's more extreme and unpopular reforms, aiming to restore stability and quell the widespread discontent that threatened to tear the empire apart. Leopold, a skilled diplomat who had previously ruled as Grand Duke of Tuscany, understood the need for a more measured approach and the importance of compromise and conciliation, recognizing that Joseph's reforms had alienated too many powerful groups. His reign was tragically short, and he was succeeded by his son Francis II, who later became Francis III of Austria, reigned 1792–1835, whose long and pivotal reign would be entirely dominated by the seismic upheaval of the French Revolution and the subsequent Napoleonic Wars, an era that fundamentally reshaped the European order and tested the Habsburg monarchy to its very core, demanding extraordinary resilience, adaptation, and an enduring commitment to conservative principles. Against the tide of revolutionary change, the French Revolution, which began in 1789 with the storming of the Bastille, sent profound shockwaves across Europe, threatening the very foundations of the old monarchical order, the concept of divine right, and challenging the legitimacy of absolute rule and dynastic succession. As the revolution grew more radical, particularly after the execution of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, Maria Theresa's youngest daughter and Francis II's aunt by marriage, in 1793, Austria became a central player in the coalitions formed to combat revolutionary France and later Napoleonic France. Emperor Francis II, a staunch conservative and deeply committed to the principle of legitimate monarchy and the existing European order, saw Napoleon Bonaparte as a direct existential threat to the Habsburg Dynasty, the European balance of power, and the very fabric of traditional society, epitomizing the dangers of revolutionary ideas, military expansionism, and the destabilization of established hierarchies. The ensuing Napoleonic Wars were a period of immense military struggle and significant territorial losses for the Habsburgs, as Austria repeatedly found itself at the forefront of resistance against the French Imperium, often bearing the brunt of the fighting. Austria fought 5 separate wars against Napoleonic France, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 6th coalitions, often suffering devastating defeats and humiliating peace treaties, such as the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, the Battle of the Eyes, 3 emperors, which led to the Treaty of Pressburg and further territorial cessions, including Tyrol and parts of Venetia, and the Battle of Wagram in 1809. Vienna itself was occupied by French forces on multiple occasions, 1805 and 1809, a profound blow to Habsburg prestige and a stark reminder of their vulnerability, forcing the imperial family to flee their capital. The most significant consequence of the Napoleonic era for the Habsburgs was the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. Napoleon, having established the Confederation of the Rhine, a client state network in Germany, effectively ended the 1,000-year-old institution, which had become largely symbolic. In anticipation of this and to assert his own imperial status over his remaining dominions and prevent his title from being usurped by Napoleon, Francis II had already proclaimed himself Emperor Francis I of Austria in 1804, establishing the new, more clearly defined Austrian Empire, thereby ensuring his family's continued imperial standing and a new, more centralized identity based on their dynastic lands rather than the diffuse Holy Roman Empire. This move, while seemingly defensive and a reaction to Napoleon's ascendance, solidified the Habsburgs' focus on their hereditary lands and their diverse peoples, transforming their loose collection of territories into a more unified, centralized empire, distinct from the old Holy Roman Empire. Despite initial setbacks, repeated defeats, and the forced marriage of his daughter, Marie-Louise, to Napoleon, as part of a humiliating peace treaty, the Treaty of Schönbrunn in 1809, Austria, under the shrewd diplomatic leadership of Prince Clemens von Metternich, played a crucial role in the final defeat of Napoleon, notably at the decisive Battle of Leipzig in 1813, the Battle of the Nations, where Austrian forces were central to the coalition victory, and the subsequent invasion of France, demonstrating remarkable resilience and ultimately contributing decisively to the restoration of monarchical power in Europe. This period forged a more cohesive, albeit multi-ethnic Austrian identity, focused on preserving dynastic rule against revolutionary republicanism and Napoleonic imperialism, setting the stage for the age of Metternich. After Napoleon's final defeat and exile, Europe entered a new era shaped by the Congress of Vienna in 1815. This monumental diplomatic gathering, largely orchestrated by the brilliant, cunning, and profoundly conservative Austrian foreign minister, Prince Clemens von Metternich, aimed to restore the old order known as the Concert of Europe, maintain a balance of power among the great European states, and suppress revolutionary and nationalist movements that threatened the existing monarchies and the peace. Metternich's era from 1815 to 1848 was one of intense political conservatism and reaction, known as the Metternich system, where the Habsburg Empire became a bulwark against liberalism and nationalism, a leading force in the Holy Alliance, formed with Russia and Prussia to combat revolution wherever it appeared. They actively suppressed dissent through a vast network of spies, maintained control over their diverse ethnic populations through a powerful bureaucracy, a strict police state, and extensive censorship, particularly targeting universities, intellectual movements, and any form of nationalist organization or publication. The Carlsbad Decrees of 1819, for example, imposed severe restrictions on academic freedom and press throughout the German states, including Austria. The Habsburgs, having regained much of their lost territory, like Venetia and Lombardy, and reasserted their influence as a major European power, were at the forefront of this reactionary period, striving to maintain stability and prevent further revolutionary upheavals that could fragment their fragile multi-ethnic empire. Vienna became the diplomatic capital of Europe, and Metternich its central figure for decades, shaping the international order to preserve dynastic rule and suppress burgeoning liberal and nationalist forces which he viewed as dangerous, chaotic, and inherently destructive to the established order. The mid-19th century, however, brought renewed and unprecedented challenges to the Habsburgs' conservative order, proving that Metternich's system could only delay, not prevent, the inevitable forces of change that were sweeping across the continent. The springtime of nations in 1848 saw a massive wave of liberal, nationalist, and revolutionary movements sweep across Europe, and the Austrian Empire was particularly hard hit, facing multiple simultaneous uprisings that threatened its very existence and exposed its deep internal divisions. Liberal and nationalist revolts erupted in Vienna itself in March 1848, leading to Metternich's resignation and flight from the city, symbolizing the collapse of the old order and the initial triumph of revolutionary sentiment. Meanwhile, in Budapest, Hungarian nationalists, led by the charismatic orator Lajos Kossuth, declared independence and formed their own government, raising a formidable national army and challenging Habsburg rule directly. Similar uprisings occurred in Prague among Czechs seeking greater autonomy, in Galicia among Poles, and throughout Italy, where Italian nationalists in Lombardy, Venetia, sought unification with Piedmont and independence from Habsburg rule, leading to the First Italian War of Independence. The empire seemed on the verge of total collapse as various ethnic groups pressed for self-determination and liberal reforms. The young Emperor Franz Joseph I, who ascended to the throne in the midst of this turmoil at the tender age of 18. In December 1848, after his uncle Ferdinand abdicated and his father Archduke Franz Karl renounced his rights, inherited a deeply fractured and unstable empire, seemingly destined for fragmentation. With the crucial military assistance of Tsar Nicholas Theodore of Russia, whose forces helped crush the formidable Hungarian revolt in 1849, the Habsburgs managed to suppress the various rebellions by late 1849, restoring order through overwhelming military force and often brutal repression, but also highlighting the deep-seated ethnic tensions and the growing demands for self-determination within their multi-ethnic empire, which would persist and grow stronger for decades, ultimately leading to its demise. The conservative order was restored, but the underlying problems remained unresolved, simmering beneath the surface, poised to erupt again, proving that military might alone could not fully extinguish the flames of nationalism. Franz Joseph II's reign, from 1848 to 1916, was one of the longest in European history, spanning 68 tumultuous years, an entire era in itself. He was a deeply devoted and disciplined monarch, embodying the traditional values of duty, order, and imperial authority, a figure of stoicism and dedication who worked diligently to uphold his dynastic responsibilities. He was a symbol of continuity and stability amidst rapidly changing times, a steadfast and dutiful figure in an era of rapid industrialization, rising nationalism, increasing social unrest, and the decline of traditional monarchical power, embodying the enduring power of the dynasty even as it faced existential threats. However, his rule was also marked by a gradual weakening of Habsburg influence and a series of devastating personal and national tragedies that underscored the empire's internal fragility and external vulnerabilities. The empire faced increasing pressure from rising nationalism, particularly from the Magyars in Hungary and the various Slavic groups, Czechs, Poles, Croats, Serbs, Slovaks, Romanians, Slovenes, Ukrainians, who chafed under German and Magyar dominance, demanding greater autonomy or even outright independence, threatening the very cohesion and territorial integrity of the empire. In 1866, Austria suffered a decisive and humiliating defeat at the hands of Prussia in the Austro-Prussian War, also known as the 7 Weeks' War. This devastating loss at the Battle of Königgrätz, Sadova, resulted in Austria's definitive exclusion from German affairs, the dissolution of the German Confederation, and solidified Prussia's dominance among the German states, paving the way for German unification under Prussian leadership in 1871, effectively ending the Habsburgs' long-standing, centuries-old role in German politics and their claim to lead the German nation, a profound historical shift. This defeat, a profound blow to Austrian prestige and a clear indication of its military and political shortcomings, forced the Habsburgs to fundamentally restructure their empire as the existing centralized system, which had been reinstated after 1849, was clearly unsustainable in the face of such internal and external pressures. The need for internal reform became paramount as the empire risked further fragmentation and collapse. The outcome was the Compromise of 1867, known as the Ausgleich, a groundbreaking constitutional arrangement that transformed the centralized Austrian Empire into the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. This agreement created 2 separate, constitutionally distinct states, Austria, or Cisleithania, encompassing lands west of the Leitha River, including Bohemia, Galicia, and Tyrol, and Hungary, or Transleithania, lands east of the Leitha, including Transylvania, Croatia, Slavonia, and parts of the Banat, each with its own parliament, prime minister, and internal administration, but united under a single monarch, Franz Joseph II, who was simultaneously Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary, crowned in Budapest with the crown of St. Stephen, and common ministries for foreign affairs, defense, and finance. While it granted the Magyars significant autonomy and helped stabilize the empire for a time, preventing an immediate collapse and giving the Habsburgs a powerful and loyal partner in governing the vast realm, it exacerbated the grievances of the other ethnic groups, particularly the Slavs, Czechs, Poles, Croats, Serbs, who constituted the majority of the population in both halves of the empire and felt marginalized and oppressed within the dual structure, demanding similar levels of autonomy which were not granted, leading to continuous political tensions and unrest, particularly in Bohemia, where Czechs demanded a trialist solution, and among the South Slavs. This internal pressure, combined with external rivalries with Russia over influence in the Balkans and the rise of other great powers, created a complex and increasingly unstable geopolitical environment for the Habsburgs, often described as a prison of nations by its detractors, a precarious balancing act between competing nationalisms that proved increasingly difficult to manage and ultimately contributed significantly to its demise in the crucible of World War I. Franz Joseph's personal life was also marred by immense, almost biblical tragedy that seemed to dog the imperial family and cast a pall over his long reign, adding a layer of poignant melancholy to his public image. His younger brother, Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, whom he had somewhat reluctantly permitted to assume the Mexican throne under French patronage, was executed by firing squad in 1867, a profound and embarrassing blow to Habsburg prestige and a deep personal sorrow for Franz Joseph. His only son and heir, Crown Prince Rudolf, a brilliant but troubled intellectual, a liberal who clashed with his conservative father, and a deeply melancholic figure, died in a mysterious murder-suicide pact with his mistress, Baroness Mary Vetsera. In 1889, at the Imperial Hunting Lodge of Mayerling, a scandalous event that shook the court, devastated the emperor, and sent shockwaves across the continent, casting a long shadow over the dynasty and disrupting the line of succession, forcing Franz Joseph to rely on his increasingly unpopular nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, as heir. His beloved wife, Empress Elizabeth, the famously beautiful, enigmatic, and deeply independent Sisi, who often chafed under rigid court restrictions and was a passionate traveler, became increasingly reclusive and eccentric after Rudolf's death, and was tragically assassinated by an Italian anarchist, Luigi Lucchini, in Geneva in 1898, a final crushing blow for the aging emperor. These profound personal losses undoubtedly took a tremendous toll on the aging emperor, who became an increasingly solitary and melancholic figure, rigidly adhering to routine and duty as a form of solace and escape from his private grief, bearing the immense weight of his empire and his family's misfortunes with stoic resignation, a truly tragic figure of duty and imperial decline. By the turn of the 20th century, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was often seen as the sick man of Europe, a multi-ethnic patchwork struggling to adapt to modernity, grappling with escalating nationalist aspirations and maintaining cohesion. Amidst the rising tide of Pan-Slavism, supported by Russia, and German expansionism from the newly unified German Empire, its internal contradictions, particularly the unresolved nationalities question, and the constant demands for greater autonomy or independence from various ethnic groups, and its external vulnerabilities, notably in the volatile Balkans, made it a focal point of European tensions and a powder keg waiting for a spark. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Franz Joseph's nephew and heir presumptive, and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, by Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist and member of Young Bosnia, was that spark that ignited the powder keg of World War I. While the assassination was the immediate trigger, the deeper causes lay in the complex web of secret alliances, imperial rivalries, economic competition, and, crucially for the Habsburgs, the unresolved nationalist questions within their empire and the broader Balkan region, where Austria-Hungary and Russia vied for influence and where Serbian nationalism, advocating for a greater Serbia, was seen as a direct existential threat to the empire's southern territories and its very integrity, a threat that many within the Habsburg court felt must be decisively addressed to save the empire from further disintegration. Franz Joseph, with the full support of his hawkish advisers, notably Chief of the General Staff Konrad von Hötzendorf and Foreign Minister Leopold von Berchtold, saw the assassination as an opportune moment to finally crush Serbian nationalism, which he believed threatened the integrity of his multi-ethnic empire, and aimed to dismantle his state by promoting separatist movements among its South Slavic populations. The declaration of war against Serbia on July 28, 1914, set off a rapid chain reaction among the great powers of Europe, locked into their rigid alliance systems, Triple Entente versus Central Powers, leading to the largest and most destructive conflict the world had ever seen, quickly engulfing the continent and beyond into a global conflagration. The Austro-Hungarian army, despite initial surges of patriotism and moments of bravery, performed poorly on many fronts against the Russians, e.g. in Galicia, suffering massive losses in the Carpathian Winter Offensive, Serbians, initially, suffering humiliating defeats, and later Italians on the grueling Isonzo front, fighting 12 brutal battles, suffering catastrophic losses, millions of casualties, and relying heavily on German military support to avoid complete collapse. The war stretched the empire's already strained resources to breaking point, exacerbated internal ethnic tensions as different national groups found their loyalties divided and war weariness set in, leading to widespread desertions, protests, and a complete breakdown of morale and cohesion. The combination of prolonged trench warfare, brutal fighting on multiple fronts, widespread food shortages, and rampant disease accelerated the internal decay of the fragile empire as its diverse populations became increasingly disillusioned with the war and the imperial system. Franz Joseph died in November 1916 at the advanced age of 86, after 68 years on the throne in the midst of the brutal war. A symbol of a bygone era passing into history, a rigid anachronism in a rapidly modernizing world consumed by total war, he left the throne to his grandnephew, Emperor Charles. Charles, a young, well-intentioned, and deeply pious ruler, desperately tried to find a way to make peace and save the empire, initiating secret peace feelers with the Entente powers, recognizing the futility of continued warfare and the dire state of his realms. However, his efforts were in vain, blocked by his German allies, who insisted on a total victory and refused any compromise peace. The escalating demands of total war and the Allied powers' increasing commitment to the principle of national self-determination, which meant the inevitable dismemberment of multi-ethnic empires like Austria-Hungary, the forces of nationalism, economic collapse, widespread internal revolts, and military defeat were overwhelming, rendering any attempt at preserving the old order futile. As World War I drew to a close in October and November 1918, facing imminent military defeat, widespread internal revolts, and the collapse of all central authority, the Austro-Hungarian Empire simply disintegrated. The various ethnic groups within the empire, buoyed by President Woodrow Wilson's principle of self-determination and the promise of independent nation-states, declared their independence one after another, forming new national entities. The Austro-Hungarian Parliament dissolved the union with Austria in October 1918, and on November 11, 1918, Emperor Charles I, facing an undeniable reality, issued a proclamation effectively renouncing his right to participate in state affairs, though not formally abdicating, hoping to preserve the monarchy for a future restoration. 2 days later, he issued a similar proclamation for Hungary. The Habsburg monarchy, which had endured for centuries, formally ceased to exist, replaced by new independent nations like the Republic of Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and parts of their former territories absorbed into Yugoslavia, Poland, and Romania, redrawing the map of Central and Eastern Europe irrevocably and ending centuries of imperial rule. Charles Vars made several desperate but ultimately futile attempts to regain his throne in Hungary in 1921, but failed due to international pressure and Hungarian resistance, and died in exile on the island of Madeira in 1922, the last reigning Habsburg monarch, ending a 1,000-year saga of power, ambition, and struggle, and closing a monumental chapter in European history. The legacy of the Habsburgs is undeniably immense and multifaceted, continuing to influence scholarship, national identities, and cultural institutions across Europe, a testament to their profound historical impact. They were, in many ways, an anomaly in European history, a dynasty that defied simple categorization and offered a unique model of governance and imperial ambition, strikingly different from the emerging nation-states that surrounded and eventually replaced them. Firstly, their dynastics, longevity, and unprecedented expansion through marriage remain unparalleled in European history. The marriage policy wasn't just a tactic, it was the very core of their strategy, a sustained, multi-generational commitment to matrimonial alliances that allowed them to accumulate vast and disparate territories without constant, ruinous warfare. In their early stages, this created a unique, almost accidental, empire built on legal inheritance and intricate genealogical planning rather than pure conquest, demonstrating a mastery of soft power centuries before the term was coined. This intricate web of alliances and claims meant that even losing a war could result in a marriage that brought new territories or claims. Their commitment to marrying within a relatively small circle of European royalty while consolidating power and preserving wealth within the family also had profound genetic consequences, as tragically evidenced by the debilitating physical and mental condition of Charles II of Spain, serving as a cautionary tale of the dangers of extreme inbreeding and its long-term biological effects on a ruling house, highlighting the unintended and devastating consequences of such a long-term strategy for dynastic purity. Secondly, their multi-ethnic nature was a defining and enduring characteristic of their empire for centuries, a complex tapestry of peoples and cultures. Unlike the nascent nation-states that sought homogeneity, the Habsburg Empire embraced, or perhaps was simply forced to manage, an extraordinary diversity of peoples, languages, and cultures: Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, Croats, Serbs, Slovaks, Romanians, Italians, Ukrainians, Slovenes, Jews, and many more, each with their own traditions, legal systems, and aspirations. This unparalleled diversity was both a source of immense cultural richness, fostering unique artistic and intellectual cross-pollination in cosmopolitan cities like Vienna, Prague, and Budapest, which became vibrant centers of innovation and creativity and a constant challenge, contributing to both its vibrant complexity and its eventual downfall due to escalating nationalist demands that it could no longer contain or accommodate. Their attempts, sometimes successful through pragmatic compromise and enlightened reform, like Maria Theresa's administrative reforms or the Ausgleich of 1867, sometimes disastrous through suppression and neglect to govern such a varied populace, offer profound lessons in multicultural administration, identity politics, and the complexities of holding together disparate national groups under a single crown, lessons that remain strikingly relevant in contemporary discussions of diversity, integration, and governance in pluralistic societies worldwide. The Habsburgs' approach to governance often involved a delicate balancing act, attempting to reconcile central authority with regional autonomy, a challenge few other empires faced on such a scale. Thirdly, their role as defenders of Catholicism and Western Europe against the Ottoman Empire cannot be overstated. For centuries, the Habsburgs stood as a primary bulwark against Ottoman expansion, particularly in Central Europe, shaping the religious and geopolitical landscape of the continent. The sieges of Vienna in 1529 and 1683 are stark reminders of their pivotal role in this long-running conflict, which secured much of Christian Europe from Ottoman rule and determined the cultural and religious orientation of vast swathes of Central and Eastern Europe. Their commitment to the Counter-Reformation also profoundly impacted religious and political developments within the Holy Roman Empire and their own domains, often leading to internal strife, but also solidifying Catholic identity in regions like Bohemia, Austria, and Hungary, leaving a lasting religious and architectural imprint, e.g., the widespread construction of magnificent Baroque churches and monasteries. This defense of Christendom against the Ottomans often provided them with a unique legitimacy and rallying cry, uniting diverse subjects under a common cause. Fourthly, their patronage of the arts and sciences left an indelible mark across Europe, contributing significantly to the cultural flowering of various periods. From the Spanish Golden Age under Philip II, supporting figures like El Greco, Velázquez under Philip IV, and Zurbarán, who produced some of the most iconic works of Western art, to the magnificent Baroque splendors of Vienna under Leopold I and Maria Theresa, which saw the construction of grand palaces like Schönbrunn, the Hofburg, and the Karlskirche, and the flourishing of music with composers like Haydn, Mozart, and later Beethoven and Schubert. The Habsburg courts were vibrant, centers of artistic, architectural, and intellectual innovation. They amassed vast, world-renowned collections of art and artifacts, like the Kunstkammer at Ambras Castle and later the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, holding treasures from across their domains, established scientific institutions and academies, like the Academy of Sciences in Vienna, and fostered a thriving cultural scene that continues to define cities like Vienna today, home to world-class opera, classical music, and intellectual inquiry, e.g., the Vienna Circle of Philosophers, and the birth of psychoanalysis under Freud. Their contributions to music, architecture, painting, literature, philosophical thought, and scientific inquiry are a testament to their lasting influence beyond the battlefield and the negotiating table, enriching European civilization in countless ways and setting cultural standards for generations, demonstrating that power was not just military, but also cultural. Finally, the Habsburg legacy continues to resonate deeply in modern Europe, shaping its present and future. The borders, national identities, and even many of the historical grievances of numerous Central and Eastern European states were profoundly shaped by the existence and ultimate collapse of the Habsburg Empire. The historical narratives of independence and oppression that simmered under Habsburg rule continue to inform political dynamics, historical memory, and national character in the region, influencing contemporary geopolitical alignments and cultural expressions, particularly the complex relationships between the successor states. Moreover, the very idea of a multi-ethnic state, with its inherent challenges and potential richness, remains a topic of contemporary relevance in a globalized world grappling with migration and diverse populations, making the Habsburg experience a fascinating and complex case study for historians and political scientists alike, offering invaluable insights into the enduring struggles of unity and diversity in a complex societal fabric. Even today, the magnificent architecture, the artistic collections, the distinct cuisine, the vibrant coffee house culture, and the complex social structures of cities like Vienna, Prague, Budapest, Innsbruck, Salzburg, and Lviv continue to reflect centuries of profound Habsburg influence, a visible, tangible testament to their enduring cultural imprint on the continent, a silent echo of a vanished empire that continues to shape the character of Central Europe and beyond. Their story reminds us that history is never truly over. Its echoes reverberate through time, shaping our present understandings. In conclusion, the Habsburg Dynasty was far more than just a succession of rulers or a collection of dusty historical dates. They were a singular force of nature, a family that, through cunning strategy, unwavering determination, immense resilience, and sometimes sheer historical fortune, managed to build and sustain an empire of unparalleled scale and complexity, for many centuries adapting and evolving across different historical eras, from medieval feudalism to enlightened absolutism to a complex dual monarchy. From the obscure beginnings of Habsburg to the grandeur of Vienna and Madrid, from the golden age of Charles V, stretching across continents, to the ultimate tragic drawn-out end in the brutal fires of World War I, their story is a testament to the ebb and flow of power, the enduring power of family ambition, the profound impact of religious and geopolitical conflict, and the multifaceted influence a single lineage can have on the course of human history. Their saga offers a unique and invaluable lens through which to understand centuries of European development, its geopolitical conflicts, its immense cultural achievements, its profound social evolution, its religious transformations, its administrative innovations, and its relentless, often painful path towards modernity and the nation-state model. The Habsburgs may no longer sit on thrones, their double-headed eagle no longer flies over vast dominions, and their empire is long gone, dissolved into independent nations, but their shadow stretches long across the continent, a silent, majestic witness to a past both glorious and tragic, their influence permanently etched into the very fabric of European civilization, a reminder of the enduring power of dynastic legacy and the complex tapestry of history itself. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is not merely a sequence of dates and battles, but a rich, complex tapestry woven with the threads of individual lives, dynastic ambitions, profound struggles, and the ceaseless, irreversible march of time, offering lessons that continue to instruct and inspire us today. Thank you for joining me on this extensive journey through the captivating history of the Habsburg Dynasty. I hope you found this deep dive as fascinating as I did, and that it offered a comprehensive understanding of this extraordinary family's monumental impact on the world, shedding light on their unique approach to empire building and their lasting legacy. If you enjoyed this video and appreciate this kind of in-depth historical exploration, please consider giving it a thumbs up, sharing it with someone who loves history as much as we do, and subscribing to the channel for more in-depth explorations of the past. Your continued support truly makes these long-form videos possible and allows me to continue bringing these intricate historical narratives to you. Don't forget to leave your comments about your day and your future goals below. I'm genuinely looking forward to reading them and connecting with all of you in the community section, building a vibrant space for historical discussion. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and I'll see you soon for our next historical adventure.